I think the most important questions facing us, well, there are many, but if you were to list them, they'd probably include the following topics. First of all, I think it's important for people who live in nations, in countries, to be allowed to express opinions that support the nation, not against other nations, but really against the international technocracy, which has had a good chance at governing Europe and in other parts of the world for the last 15 years. Hasn't done a very good job, and other ideas need to be considered. I think those ideas would be such a thing as having genuine borders, of course, but also promoting the family, giving greater respect to religious and traditional moral opinions. Now, obviously, nobody is going to be forced to go to Mass, for example, but at the same time, people who've lived, particularly where I am in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, when they see the attempt to discourage Christian belief and to try to drive it underground, what they remember is what happened under the communists. They listen to the words that governments say, and even when those words are deceitful, nonetheless they recognize a kind of a sound which reminds them of the way the communist governments talked about things. So religious liberty is a very key thing, because religious liberty is also at the foundation of almost all civil liberties as well. And I think that liberalism, which actually attempts to enforce liberal opinions, can't really be considered a genuine liberalism, can it? Liberalism is allowing everybody to have their own point of view and to express it. That's not the way liberals are currently talking.
And are there any trends across Europe that make you pessimistic about the future of Western European countries?
I'm temperamentally an optimist, but I'm a realist above all. Of course, it worries me that there are attempts in Europe, and particularly in Brussels, to narrow the range of acceptable and respectable political opinion. That's a bad thing, and it's a foolish thing, because it drives those opinions underground. The great historian Macaulay said about censorship, "Oh, wise and prudent policy, to leave the serpent its deadly sting, but to remove only its warning rattle." And censorship leaves the sting, but removes the warning rattle.
And are there any trends that you see emerging across Europe again that you think give optimism, that give you a cause for optimism for the future?
Yes, of course. One of them is that in all the recent elections, parties which represent, I would say, conservative opinions of a reasonable kind have done well. The mainstream parties on the right and on the left in the main, not everywhere, have shrunk. And so that what used to be a huge majority of the European Parliament, for example, is now a small majority. The centre has shrunk, and the extremes, and I don't obviously favour all extremes, even though some extremes are not extremist, but the extremes now take a larger share of the vote in the European Parliament. I think in time we're going to see the conservative half of the European Parliament grow more important, because I think the EPP cannot be the mainstay of a fundamentally left-wing establishment in Europe. And I think that the Christian Democrats in Germany and in other countries, they're going to find their voters saying, both domestically in their countries, but also in relation to the European Parliament, look, we don't want Christian democracy to maintain an unsympathetic left-wing government in power, and we therefore are urging you to join with for example, the ECR group, the European and Conservatives Reform Group, that we want you to join with them in pursuing a civilized, intelligent, conservative politics.
And on the European Union, do you think it's currently headed in a successful direction or a direction likely to produce failure?
Well, everybody admires Mario Draghi. They don't always have not always agreed with him on everything, but the fact is he is one of the most able economic minds in Europe. He has just produced a report for the European Union. I haven't seen anybody denounce that report. That report says that Europe is headed in the wrong direction economically, and unless there is greater reform, less regulation, for example, then the European Union over time is going to go to hell in a handbasket. Nobody has opposed that. But you don't hear many people saying it's got to be, it's not enough to write the report, we now have to implement the report. Because whenever you have anybody like Draghi proposing an intelligent reform policy, it always includes difficult things which are painful. I'm an old Thatcherite, so I remember the difficulties Mrs. Thatcher had in reforming the British economy. I think the reforming the European Union and its economy are at least as difficult, and there are far more obstructive people and far more obstructive institutions trying to prevent that reform. I wish Mario Draghi well. I wish and I hope his reforms, plural, are implemented. I can't be optimistic about it.